Welcome to the STATMed podcast, where we teach you how to study in med school and how to pass board-style exams. Your hosts are Ryan Orwig and David LaSalle, learning specialists who have decades of experience working with med students and physicians. This is the third episode in a three-part series where Ryan and Dave discuss common mistakes med students and doctors make on board exams. If you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2 yet, we'd encourage you to check those out.
Because what it means is that you don't have to know the answer to the question in order to get the question right. It's empowering. Because it means that you can take the bits and pieces you do know, and there are things you can do and steps you can take that will get you to the right answer, even if you don't know what the right answer is.
Here are Ryan and Dave.
Hey, Ryan Orwig and David LaSalle here with STATMed Learning. We talk about studying, timing, and testing in medical education. And today we're going to talk about types of test-taking misses bad test takers experience. So the next mistype that we talk about a lot is the prediction trap. What do you think about that? What can you tell us about the prediction trap?
The prediction trap comes with a lot of baggage, right? Because I think that somewhere along the line, pretty much everybody that we work with has been told that they should be able to predict the answer to the question before they even look at their answer options, that is like a good testing strategy. Yeah. And I think that bites people over and over and over again. I think that even while they are still trying to read and process the clues on the page, people start synthesizing that and locking in. They're like calcifying their predictions, which is super dangerous. What that leads to is that, well, two things. Number one, as I'm reading anything that doesn't match my prediction, I'm going to sweep it under the rug because it feels too uncomfortable. I won't know I'm doing it, but I'll do it. And number two, it leads to being unable to assess each answer on its own merits. I am now taking those answers, and instead of checking them against the clues from the passage, the actual data points that I'm given by the test, instead I'm testing them against my prediction as though it were established fact, which it isn't. Right. So that causes me to knock out anything that doesn't match exactly what was in my head. And I never get a chance to objectively weigh whether it was in fact a viable answer for that question. So I think those are a few of my initial thoughts on prediction trap.
Yeah, I think that this is like for other question constructs, predicting what you think the answer is a good choice. And so this is something that, you go to board review programs, probably a lot of MCAT classes, and they talk about this important aspect, the importance of predicting. And I just think it's a trap. It's a trap, and then it's like people, it pushes them into the binary mentality of, do I know it or do I not? And they're trying to predict, and then when they get to the end and they can't predict, it's like game over, man.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I don't know, and that's not really how consistently working these questions at a board's level should be. You have to work through the question, collect the clues, figure out what's going on, generate some sort of hypothesis, no matter how flawed or broken, eliminate the wrong options, things that are partially wrong or wrong, and then choose from the best of what's left. I think it's one of your key tenets is like this idea that I'm supposed to be able to predict the answer, you're cutting yourself off at the knees, and you're not going to be able to do that very process. Some people like to look at the answer options first, just to see what's up, to get a lay of the land, to see what neighborhood we're in. I get the idea of it. But what might happen is you might see option D as something you know a lot about or you're familiar with. And then the way you shape your reading, because of you're essentially predicting that answer option, you then shape the clues. You gravitate to this clue that does connect with that. You ignore these clues, and then you twist this clue. All of a sudden, bing, 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 D is it. And then you click it, you're like, nailed it. And that's not how these questions are going to work either. It allows for the cognitive dissonance stuff where you just ignore stuff that doesn't go with the prediction. There's so many things that happen here. What else are you thinking?
It doesn't it doesn't serve it. I think there's so much anxiety around these exams anyway, that I think that places such an undue, unrealistic burden on the tester, because the only way that predicting works is if you know the answer to every question that comes up. Yeah, and I feel like we're a little bit like, don't predict, don't, like, this sounds like a negative thing. I think at the end of the day, I think this is a real positive. I think the fact that predicting doesn't work is a real positive, because what it means is that you don't have to know the answer to the question in order to get the question right. It's empowering, because it means that you can take the bits and pieces you do know, and there are things you can do and steps you can take that will get you to the right answer, even if you don't know what the right answer is, just cold. So I think it's got to be good news.
Well, I mean, you can eliminate things that are partially false. A little bit false is all false. It's like saying something's a little bit dead. Sorry. I mean, yeah. But then you're choosing from the safest of what's left that connects with the clues and what you know. Yeah. And that is a dynamic paradigm shift in the way that we're reading and thinking and processing questions. But just to sort of wrap up talking about the prediction trap, I mean, so many people come in with this preset notion that prediction is a key part of good test taking. And we would say that is not right.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of our philosophy. All right. Well, the next mistype that we talk about is, and I sort of alluded to this just now, is the partial true miss. This is when we miss a question because we hung on to the answer option, or we validated, or we chose it because it is indeed partially true.
Yeah.
And the opposite of this guy is the partial false. So this is partial true versus partial false. Wrong answers are designed to be partially true. So when you look at A, B, C, D, E, just for the sake of argument, A, B, C, D, E, say A is right, B, C, D, E are wrong. They're not going to just be outlandish. They're going to have some, or for the most part, they're going to have some part that connects to part of the clue, the clinical scenario, the association, what have you. So what happens with, and this ties into prediction, it ties into expectation, it's all like an interconnected organism. But when somebody comes on this thing and they say, well, I like B because it connects here, I'm going to pick it. Well, maybe, right? But what I guess, let me hand this off to you for a minute. Like, what do you see with the whole, the partial true, which is bad, versus partial false, which is a better filter? What can you say about that?
Yeah, I think partial true is like a desperate testing strategy. I think that people enter into test questions feeling like they're really in a position of weakness and anxiety sometimes, and that partial true is really what they pin everything on. It's when we go into testing, hoping that there is just going to be something that connects, hoping there's just going to be something we recognize that links one of these answers to one of these clues. And when we see it, huge sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness, I can pick C, because I know it would have a very high fever that would come on suddenly. And there it is. If there is a high fever, and now I can just, at least I've got something to go on.
When we see somebody who's really doing a lot of partial true rationalizing, it wreaks havoc, obviously. But if you can then flip it, that really, the bar really goes up with this.
I mean, and it's just in its simplest formulation, you sort of said it. If an answer is partially false, it's all false.
It's all false.
That's so beautifully cut and dry. We make a big deal out of the fact that we don't do like testing tips, because as you said, right, it's like a whole organism and everything is interconnected. And that's really true. What we're talking about is a systemic overhaul for a bad test taker to become a good test taker. But if I had 5 minutes to teach somebody to be a better test taker, this is one of the things I would tell them is, if you see an answer and you can point to any piece of that answer that doesn't match, it's got to go. No ifs, ands, or buts. Treat it like it's the law. Just knock that out of there.
There's only one answer can be right for the question to be valid. We see people all say, well, I really narrow it down to 2 and I really can't parse it. There's usually a pattern underneath that. Partial true can happen with the way you validate a clue. It can be the way that you read the prompt. It can be the way you're weighing an option. It can get you at the tie break. And you have to sort of figure out where that's happening. But if you can, like you said, as a tip, this is a pretty strong one. If this is the kind of thing you're doing, got to get away from this idea of like being so excitable and falling for the partial truths, which is fine. I mean, of course you acknowledge it, but really we really want to look for that partial false. You see something that's partially false, it's got to be out.
Feels scary, like you said, it feels scary to slash out answers, and I think that's oftentimes why people don't do this.
Yeah.
But paradoxically, it feels scary. It's actually making us safer. Every answer I can knock out for cause is increasing the odds that I am going to choose the right answer. So if I can get over the fact that it feels a little scary, I'm in a better position.
Yeah, you're going to win out over the course of the test, because it's never about the individual question. It's about the entire scope of the test, where you have so many questions. So if you're always behaving in this positive manner all the way through, you eliminate this whole, in this instance, the partial true trap. It's the rising tide is going to lift all ships throughout the test. So I think the partial true is definitely a huge one. So that brings us around to what we call code failure misses. And this is this is like an umbrella of a variety of very specific types of misses. We talk about our first phase up in the way that you navigate your clues up in the passage, working through the prompt, the question being asked, the clues in the clinical scenario, lab values, any imagery, however you might sort of pull that all together. But then you come down and you have to navigate through the answer options. We like to take each option one by one in sequence, weighing it and making a decision in the moment about how viable it is. And I mean, now just up front, I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. But that is the key part of our process, is this idea that you take each one by one, put it on the scale, make a determination about how viable it is. And we use this coding process. And it's very teachable. It's very learnable. It's just different. And I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but this way we do it.
It is, it's a skill. And it runs counter to habits that you've been employing for years and years. So you've got to practice the skill. You've got to identify it as valuable and practice the skill. But it is absolutely doable to break each answer out and deal with it on its own merits, taking it, comparing it back against the clues from the passage, against the prompt, instead of to the other answers down in the answer set below, because that is a fast path to getting all tangled up and chasing your tail down in that answer.
If you're a bad test taker, there's all kinds of entanglements that happen there that we can cut out. Yeah, I've had people refer to it as building silos or partitions. They're learning how to partition, and it's almost like you have to build these barriers in your head as you read, and it's so much more doable than people think. But again, it's a reading skill. People think it's a tangent about reading, but people think like literacy is. It's not even, literacy, deep literacy, like, can I read, yes or no? Am I fast or slow? And how much do I remember? I think it's like how people think about literacy, and it's so much more nuanced than that. There's so many sub-skills, subsets, and these questions are of a very unique construction. And based on construction, you have to use a specific set of reading skills to unlock it. And I feel like people are using very ineffective skills, especially the bad test takers, and they're using the wrong reading strategies to plug into these things. And I think the way that they're navigating these questions, like we can't say like read each answer option carefully.
Right. What does that? Yeah. What does that even mean? Like that means squint a lot, or like furrow your brow while you're reading. Like, what does that even mean?
Let me put my head through the screen. I mean, I hate that kind of advice, and so we want to be more deliberate. So to me, that's going, and our clients aren't going to know what that means for them until they roll their sleeves up and they start applying the methodology to the questions, which is of course what we do in the workshop with them. And so we've created a list of ways people might botch or mess up working a question while they're doing this weighing process. So the first one is what we call soft coding. So soft coding, because again, you don't have to worry too much about our process. I mean, we're sort of talking about it in the abstract. When we teach it, it's extremely explicit and linear. But we make them put an option on the scale and make a decision as to its viability, and you have to give it one of our 5 codes, like a strong like a yes, this is right. And you're kind of answering, is this viable? Is this right? A strong maybe, a weak maybe, and that's, I'm sure you've had people try to, can I just make maybes and put them together? And it's so important to learn how to put those two. I mean, it'd be easier for us if it was just 4, but making you split that right there in a vacuum by itself is important. The question mark, I don't know this, I don't recall this. And we'll talk about ways you can pervert that, or slash, I know it's wrong, or I'd hate to pick it. So a soft code, what would you say a soft code is? What would you say, like the definition or an example of how soft coding might work?
So a soft code, I mean, I think one of the ways that I talk about siloing these answers is to take each answer option and almost assess it on its own as its own independent question, separate from all the other answer options, and weigh it on a scale, sort of a sliding scale of true to false. Like, yeah, this could very well be true, or I really don't think this is true, and I can knock it out. And then we've got several sort of weigh stations in between. I think a soft code is something like, yeah, I think this is actually a really good answer. I think this is probably true, but you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not sure about it. Maybe I don't know something about this that would make it wrong. And so instead of giving it that yes that it deserves, I'm going to slide it down into the middle. Or at the other end of the scale would be like, no, I don't think this is it, but it could be it. Maybe sometimes in fringe cases, I mean, this is a kid, maybe that's different. And now we're sliding back again into the squishy middle. So soft coding is taking what we know. I think it happens because we're testing scared. I think that's what it is. I think a lot of times it is because we're not trusting what we know. We're not willing to lean on what we know. So we're trying to account for what we know and anything else that might be true, that we might not know or might have forgotten or might be wrong about. You just can't test that way. You know, the way I think of it
perverts our interpretation of the readout of the rock on the scale of the code. And then it's unreliable. So, and what you talked about is the importance of trusting what you know. That is a key tenet to all test taking. It's got to be.
Which is like terrifying, right? For a lot of people, it's like, but I'm wrong. I don't know things. I mean, that's like a revolutionary idea in to a lot of bad testers.
To put it in such bold terms, all you have is what you know. That's all you have. Are you going to miss some questions because you don't know stuff? Absolutely. Can test taking have you wiggle your way to 100%? I mean, no. You're going to miss questions. It's not about that. It's about consistently plugging into the question, showing what you know, choosing the safest option, and moving forward. You're going to miss questions, but if you do that consistently, you're going to be okay on the other side of it if you know enough. But again, it's also readjusting what we think about what it means to know stuff. You don't have to know everything about every question to get a question, a substantial number of questions right. Sometimes, absolutely, you might not know that one little factoid and that undoes the whole thing and you're not going to get it right. There's nothing to be done about that. You're going to miss that question, and we call that a fair miss. Now, but if you're coming in and you find that one little clue you don't know and you're like, game over, it undoes, then you have no chance. You're cutting yourself off at the knees, you have no chance. Or you see an answer option that you don't know anything about and you flip out about it. Or you lock onto a prediction and then and the prediction's not even down there, the thing you're trying to predict. And then it's actually the answer A, but it's like phrased differently or worded differently. You don't even fairly ever put it on the scale. You're just like, that's not the thing I predicted, so therefore it's out. And then you're eyeballing it. But it all does come back to trusting what you know. And again, that is scary, but I think if you can unlock, again, I wouldn't ever just end with that, right? Like, hey guys, better test taking, trust what you know, good luck. Thanks for coming to our TED Talk, right? It's like, that is just one of the underlying principles. And you cannot code accurately if you don't trust the parts of what you know. And so oftentimes soft code, we can see the codes and we can teach you to see that the codes are soft. And then we got to understand why. And often it is like that, not trusting myself. You're adding those twisty disclaimers of what if or but maybe. It's saying like, I think this is right, but I could be wrong. What is all the studying and the clinical experience worth if you're going to just chop it off with those little disclaimers at the end, and then all your codes end up going to the middle? You're keeping free radicals in play that should have been eliminated. You're pushing way too many things to tie breaks. Some questions should go to tie break, but if you're artificially pushing way too many things to tie break, which is overburdening an already really overburdened system, it's a bad idea. So again, it's a symptom that is often, I think we're often dealing with soft codes. Like, you're not going to usually come out of the first homework assignment with really good hard codes, which is what you want. So it's a pretty normal place to start, right?
Yeah. And I think in some ways it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how you give codes in the first place, which people don't know, because this is our system that we've created. Yeah. So you don't come in pre-built with that. But it is important, I think, to recognize that these codes aren't based on like, how do I feel about this answer? Right. I think a lot of people are coding based on like my gut feeling about this. Like, I kind of like this one. I'd rather not choose this one.
It's just so much about the gut. People want to talk about the gut. Like, you know what? If your gut, whatever the gut is, it's such a big, vague, amorphous thing that we talk about culturally. If you're really good at your gut and test taking at this level, you're probably not calling us.
Right.
So we want to get rid of that. And again, I don't want to be like, go with your gut. Like, we don't, that's not the kind of advice we want. But right, they're saying like this gut thing, right? And we're taking the ambiguity out of that and turning it into something that's more reliable with more concrete feedback that we can analyze and then change that behavior to get to those harder codes.
Yeah, the way I think of it is that when I give a code, I want to always be able to explain why I gave that code. I want to be able to say what my rationale was. Why do I think that this deserves a strong maybe? And the kind of rationale that I should be able to give is the kind of argument that I would make in a court of law, not the kind of argument that I would make at a backyard barbecue with my friends, right? At a backyard barbecue with my friends, I'm going to be like, oh, come on, you just know it's true. It feels true. It's obviously true. It's got to be true, right? Yeah. And in a court of law, imagine me saying that to the judge, like, come on, Your Honor, it just feels right, doesn't it? No, I got to present evidence. I got to be able to point to concrete evidence that supports that answer. Where do I get that evidence? Well, it's right up there in the passage for me, and it is in all of the knowledge that I've acquired through all of my hard study. So I put those things together, and I should be able to say, I am giving this answer a strong maybe because it matches this clue, it matches this clue, this connects to what I know, but there's still some pieces I'm not sure about. There's some unknown out there. So it's not quite a yes, but I've got enough evidence pulling me into strong maybe territory.
One of the things that I find that we have to really, like a certain fire we have to light in our clients, is the use of because or why, these rationale pieces. I gave a slash because of this, but I should have given it a plus because of this, because of these clues. And what a lot of people want to do is not go into that. They don't want to necessarily go to the why or the because, and we make them. It's just like, sorry, you got to give me that. And then once you ignite that fire, that sort of illuminates the path, illuminates the track, and that's how they grow it, I think, or at least in part. And again, when we talk about this test taking stuff, we have a very specific construct and scope, but it just depends on how an individual slots into it, right? To then figure out the path. When we were building the boards workshop, there was an idea of like, hey, can we just make these like, a 4-hour video series or an 8-hour video series and just let people buy it for cheap, and then everybody has it and everybody wins. But you can put some stuff out there, but the back half of it, you really need that customized. You need, somebody like you or me really walking through it and giving troubleshooting and giving that feedback and helping them build the construct, build the track, and how it plugs into them. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's and it's exciting work, I think, for clients. And I don't think people expect that they come in and you really start to see, oh my gosh, this is what I've been doing. And I had no idea that this is what I was doing. And there is a path that I can follow that can get me to where I want to be. I mean, I think it does. It lights a fire that way too. I think people get excited about it.
Well, I think, yeah, even up front when they watch like the first few units, they're like, wow, that was creepy. It was like you were talking about me. It's like you were in my head. They say that, right?
Yeah.
So the second of the code fail misses that we can talk about is the abuse of the question mark. So one of our codes, and this is sort of an like off to the side, because I mean the others fit on a pretty tight continuum of yes, strong maybe, weak maybe, out. But then down there, sort of near the bottom, is also this question mark, where you can code something and say, I don't know what this is. I've never heard of this drug. Oh, I know I've seen this enzyme. I've heard of it, but I know nothing about it. I don't know how to say like, I have no idea how this thing relates, question mark. So how might somebody abuse a question mark?
Yeah, I think there are sort of two different causes of abusing the question mark. I think the first one is it's just a subtype of soft coding, where we see something and we say, well, I mean, I know some things about it, but I don't know everything about it. I don't know enough to feel confident enough to get rid of it, or enough to feel confident enough to put it in the maybe category. So I'm just going to put a question mark on there because I can't get down in the weeds like that. So I think it's just extreme form of soft coding.
They're just punting on it. They're like, I don't want to make an actual decision, so I'm just going to give it a question mark, right?
Yeah, right. And sometimes that is because it is a considered answer. They look at it and they're like, well, I have some information about it, but I don't know if I have the right information. I don't know if I have enough.
Or enough. I don't have enough.
Yeah. And then sometimes it is just a quick jump thing that people do where they see something on the page and they don't recognize it. And right away, like, don't recognize it, question mark, move on. And that happens sometimes because I've already got an answer that I kind of like.
Yep.
And so I'm just going to put
the prediction. It's not the thing I predicted. Therefore, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she was talking about this question she missed between multiple sclerosis and ALS. And so she had predicted whatever it was, like ALS. And so she gets down to, like, say the right answer is B, and it's ALS by some other description or some other label or something to do with it. And since it didn't literally say that, she just like moved right on. And so she strikes it, but you could also be like, well, I don't know what that is because it's not the thing that I'm thinking about. So you could just give it a bad slashing out the right answer. Or I think she was just like, well, I don't know. And she didn't really put it on the scale to see what she thought. I mean, I think it's really easy to listen to us talk about this and be like, how on earth could you ever do this stuff under the rigid time confines, right?
Yeah.
Look, guys, we are going to always sound like we're not aware of time because we're talking about doing all this stuff. Our ultimate concern is time. Like, if you can't do this stuff under time, then forget it. So we are very concerned about time, but it's ridiculous for people of our expertise and our process to worry about time up front. We have to get all the other ducks in a row first. Efficiency will come later.
I mean, I think we've covered it. It just serves as a placeholder, right? There's a kind of testing I think about. I think some of our clients fall into. I think of it as two basket testing, where the first thing I'm going to do is go through my answers and sort them into a no basket and a maybe basket.
Yeah, they want to do a quick knockout skim or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. And so oftentimes the question mark is just something, it's just like a placeholder. Like it lets me keep it around. Like I don't want to get rid of it. It lets me keep it around. And it's a superficial processing. At some point, I've got to dig in and see what I know and see what I don't know if I want to have a chance of getting to the right answer. But it's unpleasant to deal with an answer that I don't recognize right out of the gate, or it's unpleasant to deal with an answer that I don't know that much about. It forces me to take a good hard look at it, at what I know and what I don't know, which is a little bit uncomfortable.
Right. So another mistype is what we call comparative coding. This is one of those things. It's like, it's real bad. I think I know why, but it's almost, and I like to know why in a lot of situations, but this is just like, look, I'm telling you, this is bad. Don't do it. So what can you define comparative coding for us?
Yeah. We already talked about sort of siloing our answers, taking them one by one and dealing with them in isolation. Comparative coding is just any time when I start treating my answer option set globally and I start bouncing answers off of other answers and saying, well, I like this answer, but not as much is I like that other answer.
Boom, right there. That is the nutshell of it, right?
Yeah. And it's hard to avoid. I fully grant that getting out of that habit is really hard, because for most people, I think most people start taking multiple choice tests in like third grade. And, oftentimes the first testing advice we ever get in our lives is look at all the answers, cross off the bad ones, compare what's left, which I think is great testing advice if you're taking a dinosaurs quiz in third grade. I don't think it's good testing advice anymore for something that is this complicated.
Yeah, I don't know when that advice does become obsolete.
I could tell you why I think it's so dangerous. I think it's dangerous because, if I take my first answer A, and I look at it and I'm trying to decide how strong that answer is, right? Is this a safe choice for me? What am I going to look at? I'm going to look at my prompt. I'm going to look at my clues from the passage, and those are what's going to inform the code that I end up giving answer A. So I'm testing it against things I know to be true because they're given to me right there on the page. But if I then take answer B, and instead of taking it back to those clues on the page, I just bounce it off of answer A, now I'm comparing an unknown to an unknown. I don't have anything solid to push off against. And if I was wrong at all in my assessment of A, well, that's going to cause me to miscode B, and then C, and then D, and right on down the line. So I think comparative coding is, among other things, a really great way to take one error and turn it into a whole cascade of errors.
Wow,
which is obviously problematic.
Force multiplier against itself. And I think the other thing is, if we think that working memory is at the heart of a lot of bad test taking, then you start on comparing B to C. All of a sudden, your working memory is starting to overwrite a key clue here or there.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, who knows? You might have just lost the thing that made B less good, and then all of a sudden you just overwrote that. And then all of a sudden B becomes better because the clue that was weakest against it is now lost. I think that's also part of it. And so there's this idea of comparative coding is just it's consistently an issue. And then it's consistently an issue. And then we see when people clean up their process, it just sort of goes away, and it improves outcomes, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's 100% behavioral, which means that it can be learned and it can be changed.
Yeah, and all this is, it's amazing the behavioral aspects of all this stuff. Then the next one is what we call hugging the familiar, which makes so much sense. But can you define what hugging the familiar means?
Yes. So hugging the familiar is when you're working a question and you're feeling maybe some anxiety around the question because you feel anxiety around testing or because this is not your favorite topic or whatever it might be. And then we see an answer and, beautiful. That answer I know something about. That answer, I just looked at a couple of answers and I was like, I don't know if these are right or not. But that one, like, I know I've studied that answer and I know maybe even one piece of it connects, maybe not, I don't know. But it jumps out at us and we grab onto it. We grab onto it like a life ring in the ocean.
And it obscures everything. There's like a blast radius around this thing.
Yeah.
It makes things it makes the concrete stuff fuzzier. It warps our reading of the clues. It might promote twisting. It might promote rounding down clues because it might play into some cognitive dissonance where we only pay attention to the stuff that validates it, or we're just turning the question into a referendum on which of these answer options do I know more about.
Yeah.
And then you end up picking the thing that you know more about in general without vetting it against the concrete clues in the question. And then you end up using your knowledge to damage yourself instead of you're using your knowledge to validate a wrong answer instead of using that same exact set of knowledge to knock out that same answer option. The thing that you would know enough to say, I at least know this one's wrong. Then if it's 5 answer options, then at least you're picking 4 out of 5, 1 out of 4 instead of 1 out of 5. Right. And it's a really painful thing, but you can see how a lot of these coding issues are like from having fuzzy process instead of having a really crystallized process for working through each question all the time, every time, which is at the heart of our principle. So you're not making all these decisions that are superfluous and unnecessary and burdensome. but just and then also clarity of thought. Like I'm not saying you're always going to have clarity of thought. I mean, it's super stressful. You are worried about your career, your life, your financial outcome, your dreams, your residency outcomes, your work life balance. It's all that stuff, and this stuff's not going to go away. But if you have a really rigid system that you train with, that gives you feedback that you can get better at, then you can lean on the system on test day, and that's going to help. And hugging and this idea of hugging the familiar, it's a real trap. And I think it's something you can really cut out. What's that?
Yeah, if you track the logic of hugging the familiar out, it's easy to see how absurd it is, right? Because hugging the familiar is built on this logic that the test is written specifically and only for you, so that the correct answer is always the one that you know the most about, that you are most familiar with, which, once you say it out loud, you're like, that's ridiculous. Of course, that's not true. But that's sort of what's underlying that decision to grab onto an answer just because I know more about it. I have like a dumb analogy for hugging the familiar, of course. Nice. The way I think of hugging the familiar is like, imagine that you have been traveling abroad. You've been away from home for a couple of weeks. Sounds terrific, but in this case, you haven't spoken English to anybody in a couple of weeks, and you're feeling a little lonely, and you're in a crowded city, and you see somebody from back home. And the next thing you know, you run across the street and you throw your arms around them, give them a great big hug and a squeeze before stopping to think, wait a second, is this somebody that I like from back home, or is this somebody that I can't stand from back home? And I think that's the remedy to hugging the familiar, because like familiarity is good. That means you know something about it, but you've got to ask yourself the second question. And the second question is, okay, now given what I know about it, does that pull me toward this answer or push me away from it? It lets me make an informed decision. But I've got to get to that second question. If I stop at, is this familiar or not, then I got my arms wrapped around somebody who's going to drive me crazy on my European vacation for the next week and a half.
It's a nightmare. That'd be bad. All right, very good. I like that. Then that leads into gaming the test, which I was going to start talking about just now before I realized that was our next one. And gaming the test, I don't know. It's like again, sort of thinking about that there are people in a shadowy room sitting around a dark table, plotting your demise, and you're trying to get into their heads and counter their moves against you. I mean, that's sort of how I think about it. How would you think of like gaming the test?
Yeah, that completely tallies with what my thinking is. My red flag for gaming the test is anytime I hear a client use the pronoun they. Immediately I'm like, oh, hang on, freeze. In the context of like, well, when they want you to choose this, they always give this kind of clue, or they are trying to trick me by putting this in here. Like this, all of a sudden, not only am I trying to assess what's on the page and remember what I know about this content and put all that together, now I am also like playing mental chess with somebody who I have never met and will never meet. I've got this figure out there who I've got to like fence with as I work the question. It's too much, and it's the wrong game. I'm playing the wrong game at that point. Like nobody that I work with is an expert in test design. They're experts, our clients are experts in medicine. That's your expertise, is you're like,
that's what they're spending their 10,000 hours on. That's their goal in life, right?
Exactly. So that is the turf. That's the turf that you should be. That's where you should be focusing your game. That's where you want to be playing the game. Is out of your medical expertise, not out of your like half understood attempt to hack test writer psychology.
Well, and it's also that they're grandfathering in these old like deductive reasoning strategies. They've been they took SAT classes, ACT classes, MCAT classes. Like ways to rule things out. People have to understand there are psychometricians that statistically norm these questions. There's very specific criteria being used to write these questions, and some bad test taking habits might just be ingrained. Some might come from like an SAT, MCAT prep class that doesn't really translate to these constructs, or they were even more abused in their classroom learning years of med school by interacting with professor-generated questions, which are often, not built to the same standard, not statistically evaluated nor by psychometricians. And so you come in and we got to untangle this stuff, and it's like you got to get rid of all that. And again, it's not just like saying, hey, stop doing that. That's terrible. That's very frustrating advice, but it's like, it's the system, and you got to find out where the friction point is. So it's like, we really want to make sure that we're not distorting strategy to get these weird outliers. Instead, it's like stay right down the center with it, and don't get into this idea of gaming the test. And you had said something to me a few months ago about something that's related about overly thinking about test design, about the distractors.
Yeah.
The role of distractors. Everybody that comes, like so many people, like they want to talk about foils and distractors, and what are your, like, how often do we talk about foils and distractors and stuff like that, do you think?
Only when clients bring it up.
It's interesting. I think it's like a really and nobody's like, I really wish you guys talked more about distractors at the end,
Yeah.
Like, and why do you think that is?
I don't think, I think we've got enough work cut out for us looking at what clues are in the passage that we can grab and put together and synthesize and put together with our knowledge, without also, let me back up. I'm a big believer in doing one thing at a time, right? Especially in testing, like just the cognitive burden is such that I cannot afford to be running parallel processes at the same time. The system's going to crash if I do that. So I can choose. Either I can focus on what is in this passage that is of use to me and that I can put together with what I know to try and make sense out of these answers down below, or I can focus on looking for distractors that may or may not be in there and trying to assess which clues are distractors and which clues are not, and try and sniff out anything that might be trying to lead me off the path. I have to choose between one or the other of those. I know which one I'm going to choose because I can't do both. It's going to just be a big tangled up mess. And I know which one makes most sense.
And this is definitely true for the bad test taker. I don't know about the good test taker. I don't know. It's a closed system. I can't see it. I can't see the gears. A bad test taker, we can see the gears. And it's like they're trying to listen to music and watch a TV show at the same time. Like, you're not going to get enjoyment out of either of those things. And I think, I just feel like it's too macro. They're up there trying to look at all this stuff, and it just ties into gaming the test. It's just something you don't need to be trying to figure out.
And I think we have already built in a tool that takes care of distractors, which is that partial false.
Yes.
Distractors are there if we even buy the concept of distractors, and extraneous information is there to maybe be attractive and make an answer partially true. But
I think they do. They're there. The wrong answers partially connect to clues. They're not just randomly sitting down there,
Right.
So it's built in to our system to debug those things, to pluck them out. And so we don't need to think about it. Again, I feel like people get so caught up in it that they're thinking at this trying to the big chessboard type thing. Yeah. And it's just, we don't need to go there. And I think that ties into gaming the test. We don't need to try to game the test. We just need to focus step by step, one foot in front of the other, working through the process, eliminate the wrong answer choices, choose from the safest of what's left. So sometimes you get through, your second phase, work through the answer options, and you have one high code, and you just pick it and you're done. Like, no second guessing for us. But sometimes you're going to be tied. You might get down to, you've four slashes, 2 question marks, and 2 minuses. Well, those 2 minuses are all the stuff, the weak maybes. So sometimes you're going to go to a tie break. By having a tighter system, working your way through, we want to not, you don't want to push everything to ties. And one of the first things we want to find out is how good are you at tie breaks? And we have very specific strategies we teach for various tiebreak moves. And it can't be a prescriptive thing. I think you need like a grab bag of a handful of concrete things you can do when you find yourself in a tie, and then you figure out how to use them. Is that fair? Is that sort of how you would look at the ties in general, big picture?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think tiebreakers, for whatever reason, is one place where a lot of my clients tend to default back into old habits. Yeah, like good, solid process and methodology. First phase, the reading phase. Second phase, the coding phase. Get down in the tiebreaker and just be like, I don't know, this one feels better. I'm just picking this, and I got to keep going. I mean, sometimes I think that's because they're worried about time. I think that's because sometimes things are getting real nitty gritty down there, and they don't want to really dig in and do that very granular work in order to break out which of those two options is really my safer choice. So what I think is so important in our process is that we give a mechanism. I mean, an option, a menu of mechanisms.
Yeah.
But you pick one. You pick one and you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do for this tiebreaker. And I'm going to take the information, I'm going to plug it into this little machine, and whatever comes out the other end is my safer choice. That's what I'm going to pick, and I'm going to move on.
One of the most common things people will say to us when they come to us, like, I was like, always narrow down to two, and I always pick the wrong one. Well, they don't mean that 100% of the time, but they're saying like more often than not. So if that is the case, that means you're doing something. You're putting your finger on the scale inadvertently to tip you to going to the wrong thing. And there are a few patterns for those, and it's going to be dependent on the individual. You've got to learn how to navigate with that tiebreak process. I guess another one is, people end up defaulting to a partial true or trying to rule an answer option in as opposed to a partial false rule and answer option out. It's easy to rule a wrong answer in, and very dangerous. And it's how some people are. That's like the default setting for the bad test taker. That might be unrelated to working memory, or it could be tied into it. It could be where reading and thinking intersect. It doesn't really matter. Once you see it, it's like, okay, well, we need to now learn better ways to work around it. But if you don't know the name of the phenomenon and to be able to see it after the fact, you can't fix it moving forward. So that's kind of a big picture tiebreak. We could talk about tiebreaks forever. Do you have any thoughts specific to tiebreaks right now?
I have one thing that you and I have not talked about, so I'm curious just to get your read on it. This is like something new I'm batting around with tiebreakers. Is the idea that when we go into tiebreaker, we have to start back at square one with both answers in the tiebreaker. Meaning, I think that oftentimes we go into tiebreak process and we already have a favorite answer. And then a lot of times what we end up doing is stacking evidence for that answer or stacking evidence against the other answer, with putting that finger on the scale. So I think in order to combat that, one of the things we can do is like a hard reset at the tiebreaker. Like, now I'm working a brand new question. Here I am with A and B, and I've got a process in place. I'm just going to run it through that process, and that's going to tell me. But I've got to sort of shake loose whatever my preferences are coming in. Does that sound right to you?
Oh, 100%. So that's why I like us to, in our training tool, I like them to do a dot or the check mark. Like, I'm going into tiebreak. This idea of not just sliding from second phase initial weighing into tiebreak. I like there to be this hard click, and
like a break point. Yep.
Yeah, and a scramble, reshuffle, pivot back to it. I had this guy years ago, one of my seminal students for the boards workshop, and he calls me like a week before the test, like, man, I think my tie break's really bad. I was like, you think your tie break? And I like when people call me and ask me questions. So I don't think I'm just, but I knew him really well, so I could browbeat him a little bit. I was like, you think your tie break is really bad? He's like, yeah. I'm like, why don't you know? And this is before now we make people tally it. The data is really easy to see, in large part because of this single student. That's how we build everything, is listening to our clients and building stuff moving forward. But I was like, well, go back and add them all up. Add up how many tally, and now this is automatic, but I was like, go back and tally how many questions out of your last 3 practice blocks you did, how many went to tiebreak, and then what your success rate was on them. He's like, I'm afraid. And as any caring person would say, I was like, I don't care. Go add him up and call me back. But click, it might have been harsher than that. It might have been nicer. Who knows? So he calls me back. He's like, hey, look, how'd it go? He's like, everything's great. He's like, I added him up and I'm like 68% of the time I narrowed down to 2. I picked the right one. I was like, wow, that's great. He's like, yeah, it's great. I was like, you feel better? I was like, I feel so much better. I like, well, good luck. He's like, yeah, I'm good. And we talked about, probably talked about soccer or something, or Star Wars or something. And then he got off the phone, he took his test and he passed. He was fine. But he was so freaked out about, like, thinking he was bad because he wasn't tallying it. And now, of course, like that conversation led to that being built into this thing. But you have to know what the score is. You have to see what you're doing. You have to then be able to categorize, subcategorize, find those sub patterns, and then work your way through it. Which again is, I mean, I don't know how somebody's supposed to build this on their own. This is what you and I have been doing for 15 years, building this stuff out, like listening to those stories. Like when that guy called me, I was like, that's important.
Yep.
Like that's important. That's something that's got to be built into the system. And and now it is. But I would hate to like have to, if I like time traveled and went back in time and lost like I didn't have my computer with me and lost my methodology somehow. I'd hate to have to build it again, because it's so lucky, like listening to these people and having like the single doctor, the single med student, single veterinarian, where it's like that experience informed us to sort of build these things out, because the tie break stuff is, and the whole system is just so dependent on various steps that have evolved over the years.
Yeah. And it's still happening.
Yeah.
I mean, that work is still ongoing. Yeah.
It's ongoing. And it's, it's like, I think somebody years ago was like, don't you get bored doing the same thing over and over? I'm like, it's not the same thing over and over though. It's the system, but it's navigating that individual through it. That is, it's pretty fascinating. And there's smart, motivated, hungry people makes it really worthwhile. Yeah. So the last test taking thing, and we're not going to get too down in the nitty gritty on it, is timing issues. If you run out of time, that is a test taking issue. I guess big picture, like if there's like a concrete like reading disability, like there's a real issue with reading. Like our background is like working with reading people with reading disorders, reading disabilities. Like you're not really going to get in there and really change the way that the brain reads that information. I think what you're like the speed reading and stuff like that. I think what you're going to do is just get like the whole system has just got to be super tight. The whole system has got to be so much more calibrated and get rid of all the inefficiency and really become robustly efficient with the steps. I mean, I took a guy who had ADHD and dyslexia, and he had failed step 2 because he wasn't getting to like 10 questions per block. And we installed this system, and his score took such a jump. I think he might have gotten investigated because it was like so statistically improbable to make that jump, because we're busting the curve because we're changing the whole system. So I know it's a learnable thing, but that's like on one side over here. The same system works. It just got to become hyper robust with it. Is that fair to say on like the reading issue side?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for sure. Like there are things that people do to remediate specific learning differences and reading issues. That's not what we're going to do if you come to us 3 months prior to taking your exam and say, I need help with test taking.
Right. But there are ways to do that with the system. Now, the majority is more just people coming in like, I'm always running out of time. I'm rushing through the last 5. I'm not getting to the last 3 or 5. Or, I mean, it could be more. It could be 10. I mean, it depends on how just utterly inefficient and ineffective you are, just churning and hemorrhaging time all over, the way you're tracking, the way you're training. So what do you, I mean, when we're thinking about that, like people who say like they're really worried about time.
Yeah, what are some which is everybody, right?
Time is like gravity in relation to this test. It's an inescapable force that's going to exert itself on everybody. Well, I'll have people tell me like, I don't have time issues, but I get done with like 15 minutes left over, 10 minutes left over. You probably do have time issues. You're probably flying through this thing and you're putting it on the scale, but not actually doing any of the measurements or auto-filling. I mean, so timing, I think, can go anywhere. You've got to find that happy middle ground, which the workshop will take you through. But what are some thoughts you have, just big picture on the timing stuff?
Yeah, there's a great expression. I think it comes from the Navy SEALs, where they say, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." And I think that's sort of what we're all about, which is that, first of all, we've got to start slowly enough to build you a system that can run smoothly and efficiently. And once you've got that system that can run smoothly and efficiently, well, then that's going to bring itself up to speed.
Yeah.
So we can't be frantic. We can't be chaotic. We can't be sprinting. We can't be dragging our heels. What we've got to put in place is the cleanest, most streamlined system that we possibly can. Build that from the get-go. And then so many times, just installing that system and then running it again and again and again and again, practicing, putting in the miles, the time often takes care of itself.
And that's exactly right. It often does. And then if it does, like what we never want to do, and we're always really keeping an eye on this for each individual, is we don't want to let somebody cut corners early on in foundations, because we have a progression as we work through the workshop where we add time. But you don't want to add time when somebody has really obviously poor foundations, because then you're trying to work in two different directions at once. We're trying to move forward with time, and we're trying to backtrack and backfill and correct these holes. I'm not saying that you have to be perfect with the system before you add time. What I say is you have to be like reasonably good with the system. And then, I mean, it's not necessarily like an elegant takeoff. It's oftentimes a little rocky in there, but that's necessary. It's just the cost of business. It's the cost of that skill acquisition. And yeah, it often does take care of itself. And then if it doesn't, we have protocols where we go through and help find where those gaps are, because it's usually inefficiencies or like concrete nuts and bolts with the system, or something about the philosophy of the mentality that's then causing a problem with the system.
Yeah, I think of it. Yeah, when I'm troubleshooting time issues, I think it tends to fall on like one end of a spectrum or another, where people are either like so obsessed with time that they are sprinting through and losing track of accuracy altogether, and their process is falling apart, or they're so obsessed with perfection and trying to make every move perfectly that they've let go of time altogether, and so it's taken them forever. And
we're
looking for a sweet spot.
Really precious with each piece. But yeah, I think a lot of people do come in with timing concerns and timing issues, but that has to be addressed through working through everything else to get to that. And it's got to be cleared. It's got to be cleared, and it's obviously a concern. So that sort of wraps up our talk on test taking mistypes.
Okay, so as you mentioned previously, when people call us, it's not like they are doing all of these things wrong. Generally speaking, people are doing 3, 4, 5 of these things wrong, which is good news, because that means you've got 3, 4, 5 behaviors you could change and get you a ton of points. But you've got to be able to take the system apart, see what's working, see what's not, install a system that works in a clean, efficient, effective way for you. Yes, if you're watching this and you heard anything in there that sounds like you, if you just want to learn more, check out our website. Give us a call. We're happy to talk with you and see if we can help.
Very well said. Thank you very much. And we hope to hear from you guys soon. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the StatMed podcast. If you like this show, be sure to rate it on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. You can find more test taking and studying strategies specifically developed for med students and physicians over at our blog on statmedlearning.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, Ryan Orwig from StatMed Learning. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, we'd appreciate it if you'd hit the thumbs up button below, and we'd love to hear from you, so leave us a comment with your thoughts. To make sure you don't miss future studying and test-taking tips for the medical field, be sure to subscribe to our channel. And when you do, turn on alerts by clicking the bell icon. Thanks again.